Chapter 12 of Explorers and Travelers by Adolphus W. Greely. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by William Tomko. Chapter 12, George Washington DeLong and the Siberian Arctic Ocean. Of all the routes followed by explorers attempting to extend northward our knowledge of unknown lands, there is one which, more than all others, seems to have been closed by nature to the daring enterprise of man. While successful voyages to the northward of America and along the meridian of Spitzbergen have been of frequent occurrence, yet it has been the fortune of one expedition only to penetrate the vast ice pack that covers the Arctic Ocean to the north of Siberia, and give an account thereof. This expedition, organized through the munificence of James Gordon Bennett, Jr., and known to the world as the Jeannette Expedition, was commanded by DeLong, then a lieutenant commander of the United States Navy. George Washington DeLong was born in New York City, March 22, 1844, and entered the United States Navy by graduation from the Naval Academy in 1865. He rose to be a lieutenant commander and rendered ordinary naval service until 1873, when special duty fell to his lot, which turned his thoughts to Arctic research. The rescue of the drift party of the Polaris naturally caused great alarm as to the safety of the remainder of her crew, and with the dispatch of the Tigress into the waters of Smith Sound came orders for the Juniata, to which DeLong was attached, to visit the coasts of western Greenland for additional search for the missing explorers. The Juniata proceeded to Upper Nivik as far as it was deemed safe for the man of war to venture. But its brave and sagacious commander, Captain D.L. Braine, of the Navy, thought it most necessary to search the vast inshore ice of Melville Bay, along which he correctly surmised they would conduct a retreat by boats. For this duty, novel, hazardous, and difficult, DeLong promptly volunteered. For this dangerous trip the steam launch Little Juniata, some 32 feet long and 8 wide, was selected. Her crew consisted of Lieutenant Chipp, Ensign May, ice pilot Dodge, who had served with Hayes, and 4 others, while she was equipped and provisioned for 60 days. In this small craft, DeLong, following the fast ice, reached a point immediately off Cape York, when he was struck by a violent gale. The sea was so heavy that his only chance of safety lay in carrying sail, steam being useless, to keep the boat under control. The violence of the wind disrupted the inshore ice, threatening the launch continually. Owing to fog, the presence of immense icebergs made navigation more dangerous than ever. High seas constantly broke over her, soaking everything on board and harassing the crew with the imminent danger of swamping. 30 hours the gale lasted, leaving the party in the last stages of exhaustion, wet to the skin and benumbed with cold, with closed floes to the north and east and the dangerous middle pack to the west. Under these conditions DeLong reluctantly abandoned the search and returned. This brief experience created an interest in northern work which never abated, and as a result DeLong, the voyage ended, approached James Gordon Bennett, Jr., who was favorable to his projects. Nothing, however, was done until November, 1876, after the return of the Nares expedition, when the exploration was decided on, but no vessel could be procured. Eventually, Sir Allen Young, an Arctic explorer of note, was persuaded to sell the Pandora, in which he had twice made polar voyages. The ship was, by act of Congress, given an American register under the name of Jeannette, strengthened under naval supervision, and put in commission under the orders and instructions of the Secretary of the Navy, with full discipline and force, but the expense of the expedition, repairs, equipment, and pay, was met by Bennett. On July 8, 1879, the Jeannette sailed from San Francisco, commanded by DeLong, and officered by Lieutenant Chipp, Master Dannenhauer, Chief Engineer Melville, Dr. Ambler, an ice pilot, 2 scientists, 24 petty officers and men. The route selected by DeLong was via Bering Strait, apparently under the impression that Wrangel Land was continental in extent, an idea supported by the German geographer Petermann, whose advice De Long had sought, and along the shores of which coursed the northern current that swept forever out of the vision of man such whalers as were fully beset by the ice pack north of Asia. Before pursuing his own exploration, De Long, in compliance with instructions from the Navy Department, made search for the Vega, in which ship Nordenskjold, circumnavigating Europe and Asia, had wintered at Cape Serdze Kamen, in 65° 12' north latitude, on the northwestern coast of Asia. On reaching this point, he learned that the Vega had comfortably wintered and had passed south, thus confirming the report he had gained from the natives at St. Lawrence Bay. They at once steamed northward, thankful, as De Long records, that Nordenskjold was safe, and we might proceed on our way toward Wrangel Land. Ice was soon fallen in with, and after preliminary efforts to proceed directly to the north, which impenetrable floes prevented, De Long, on September 5, 1879, got up a full head of steam and entered the pack through the best-looking lead in the general direction of Herald Island, which was plainly visible at a distance of 40 miles. It was De Long's intention on leaving San Francisco to explore this land the first winter, but completely beset by heavy floes in 71° 35' north latitude, 175° west longitude, his ship never escaped. In hopes that information of value might be had from a visit to Herald Island, an unsuccessful attempt was made to reach it by dog sledge over the fast cementing pack, but the party was turned back by impassable leads. It soon became evident that the Jeannette was drifting steadily with the entire pack. First, the direction was to the north, taking the ship out of sight of Herald Island, but next it changed to the southwest, bringing that land again in view. While the drift was by a devious and very irregular course, yet it was in the general direction of northwest from 71° 35' north and 175° west at besetment to 71° 15' north and 155° east. When the ship was finally crushed by the pack. In investigating the cause of the drift, De Long says, "As to the currents in this part of the Arctic Ocean, I think our drift is demonstrating that they are the local creation of the wind for the time being. As our drift in resulting direction has been northwest since our besetment, so the greater amount of wind has been from the southwest. Our short and irregular side drift east and west, and occasionally to south, being due to correspondingly short and irregular winds from northwest or east." The party settled down to their regular life, which, though very monotonous, soon had an element of excitement and danger introduced that never passed away in entirety. This was threatened disruption of the pack, which, seemingly without cause, would change its form and position with such suddenness and violence as to endanger the safety of the ship. On November 13, 1879, without warning, the pack separated on a line with the ship's keel, the port snow wall being carried with the pack 150 feet away, leaving open water that fortunately froze over before other violent changes took place. De Long writes, "This steady strain is fearful. Seemingly we are not secure for a moment. Living over a powder mill, waiting for an explosion, would be a similar mode of existence. I sleep with my clothes on, and start up anxiously at every crack of the ship's frame." Almost by intervention of Providence, as it seemed, the Jeannette escaped destruction from these violent disruptions, which, except that of January 19, 1880, left her, during the first winter, comparatively unharmed. On that day, with terrible groaning and grinding, the main pack was fearfully agitated. No large openings were seen, and the ice acted as though its entire periphery was subjected to steady and irresistible pressure, which, being toward the center, caused the whole surface to buckle up irregularly. Enormous pieces of ice piling up under the stern of the Jeannette brought a tremendous longitudinal pressure on the ship and broke her forefoot, which caused a serious leak. It was only through the indomitable energy and great professional skill of Melville that the leak was got under control and later cared for without taxing greatly their precious stock of fuel. The winter passed with all in health, save Danenhower, whose eyes, becoming diseased, necessitated several operations and permanently placed him off duty for the voyage. The summer of 1880 came, found them fast embedded in the ice, and went without release. Autumn passed, winter came, and even the opening year of 1881 found them with conditions unchanged, as De Long recites: "A disabled and leaking ship, a seriously sick officer, an uneasy and terrible pack, constantly diminishing coal pile and provisions, and far from the Siberian coast." A break came, however, with the discovery of new land in May, along the north coast of which the Jeannette drifted slowly. On May 31st a party was sent to examine the island, for such it proved to be, Melville being in command, as ship was then on the sick list. Melville, despite the open condition of the ice, succeeded in landing on June 3, 1881, his third day out. He was obliged to carry his instruments and provisions, at the risk of his life, through the moving pack. It proved to be a desolate, ice-capped, rocky islet, almost destitute of vegetation, and inhabited only by dovekies, who nested in the inaccessible cliffs adjoining the discharging glaciers. Another island appearing, De Long named the two Jeannette, in 75 degrees 47 minutes north, 159 degrees east, and Henrietta in 77 degrees 8 minutes north, 158 degrees east. The end of the besetment came at last. On June 12, 1881, in 77 degrees 15 minutes north, 155 degrees east, the pack showed signs of great pressure. The immense floes seemed to be alive in their motion, and despite all efforts, the Jeannette was terribly nipped, her bows being thrown high in air. It was evident that escape was hardly possible. Steps were immediately taken to abandon ship, and everything of value or use was speedily withdrawn, with boats, sledges, etc., to a safe distance. Early the next morning the ice opened a little, and the Jeannette immediately sank, with colors flying in 38 fathoms of water. De Long and his party thus found themselves adrift in the Polar Sea, more than 300 miles from the nearest point of the mainland of Asia, and about 150 miles from the new Siberian islands. While the condition of affairs seemed desperate, De Long never despaired. Lieutenant Danenhower being disabled and ship sick, De Long's main dependence was in his chief engineer Melville, who was well, strong, energetic, and fertile in expedients. They had 5 boats, 2 very small, 9 sleds, provisions for 60 days, ammunition, instruments, and records, a terrible load for the party, as 5 men were off duty, and several others too weak to do their share in the drag ropes. There remained, however, 20 dogs, whose utility was questionable, as they soon consumed more in weight than they ever hauled. The ice was very rough, large openings were frequent, snow often impeded progress, roads had to be made, and on occasion all the stores and men had to be ferried across wide water lanes. At the beginning there was so much baggage that 7 separate loads were hauled, causing the men to travel 13 times over the same road, but this was soon unnecessary as the weights were gradually reduced. To add to De Long's discouragement, he discovered that they were under the influence of a northwest drift, and after 6 days' travel due south were 28 miles further north than when the ship sunk. He refrained from discouraging the men by this information, but changing his course to the southwest, got out of the drift. On July 11th land was discovered, and turning toward it, the shipwrecked and exhausted men reached it July 28, 1881. It was in 76 degrees 38 minutes north, 148 degrees east, and was called Bennett Island. Landing was effected by ferrying and crossing heavy, fast-moving floes, and the danger was greatly enhanced by the low water, which made it extremely dangerous work to attain the surface of the overhanging ice foot. The cliffs were alive with birds, which was a welcome change of diet to the sick men especially. The island was quite mountainous, with several grass-covered valleys. A seam of coal was found, and signs of considerable animal life. Recuperated by their 9 days' rest, the party started south on August 8th and landed on Thaddeus Island of the New Siberian group, August 20th, 1881. It is unnecessary to dwell on the dangers and hardships which this unprecedented journey entailed on the members of this party, which were met with fortitude, courage, and energy that made its successful issue one of the most notable efforts in the history of man, overcoming obstacles almost insurmountable. This remarkable journey had been so far made alternately by sledge and boat, owing to the broken condition of the polar pack. From Thaddeus Island, however, an open sea enabled them to proceed in boats, which were respectively commanded by De Long, Chipp, and Melville. On September 12th, a severe storm separated the boats off the Lena Delta. Chipp, with 8 men, were lost, while Melville, with 9 others, reached a small village through one of the eastern mouths of the Lena. De Long landed in 77 degrees 15 minutes north, 155 degrees east, September 17th, with Dr. Ambler and 12 men, having been obliged to abandon his boat owing to the shallowness of the river. He took with him the ship's records, arms, ammunition, medicines, necessary camp equipments, and 4 days' provisions, which were carried on the men's shoulders. Fuel proved abundant, and Alexey and their interpreter killed 2 deer, thus improving the situation. Retarded by the presence of sick men and by the weight of cumbersome records, they followed slowly southward the barren shores of the Lena, traveling through snow and over ice which broke readily. Their feet were soon in terrible condition, and eventually an ulcer on Ericsson's foot rendered partial amputation necessary on September 29th. De Long then records the terrible situation. They were confronted by a tributary of the Lena, which must freeze before they could cross, and as to Ericsson, if forced along, he could not recover, and if I remained here and kept everybody with me, Ericsson's days would be lengthened a little at the risk of our all dying from starvation. Ice formed in a couple of days, and they proceeded, dragging Ericsson on a sled. October 3rd, food entirely failing, their dog was killed and cooked, giving them strength the following day to reach a deserted hut large enough to hold the party. Here they were storm-stayed 2 days. Ericsson dying, Alexey hunting unsuccessfully, the drifting snow and piercing cold, all these served to plunge the party into despair. De Long writes, "What, in God's name, is going to become of us? 14 pounds of dog meat left and 25 miles to a possible settlement. Read the burial service and carried our departed shipmate's body to the river where he was buried." Their last food was eaten October 7th, and nothing remained except old tea leaves and 2 quarts of alcohol. But Alexey shot a ptarmigan, of which a thin soup was made. On October 9th, the exhausted condition of some of the men and an open, unfordable creek debarred further progress of the party as a whole. In this contingency, De Long sent Nindermann and Norris ahead for relief, with orders to keep the west bank of the Lena until they reached the settlement. Later, De Long advanced a mile and camped in a hole in the bank. Alexey killed 4 ptarmigans, and the party resorted to their deerskin clothing for subsistence, but without avail. The last entry in De Long's diary, October 30th, 1881, records all dead except Collins, who was dying. Ah Sam and Dr. Ambler, of whom no mention was made. Norris and Nindermann, after a march of 120 miles, reached Bulcour, which they found deserted. Seeking shelter in one of the vacant huts, they were discovered by a native, who took them to an adjacent encampment. The native either did not understand Nindermann or were unwilling to go northward, for despite his incessant and urgent entreaties, they carried the 2 seamen southward to Boulogne, where they arrived on October 29th and met Melville and his party. This energetic officer, exhausting all practicable means, pushed his relief parties northward to the extremity of the Lena Delta, but without success. He reached the Arctic Ocean, recovered the log books, chronometer, and other articles on November 14th, when a severe storm obliged him to abandon the search. Renewing his efforts in March, 1882, he discovered, on the 23rd of that month, the bodies of his companions. An official inquiry as to the general conduct of the expedition caused the board of officers to express their opinion that the general personnel were entitled to great praise for their solidarity and cheerfulness, their constancy and endurance. The zeal, energy, and professional aptitude of Melville were noticed, and special commendation given to De Long for the high qualities displayed by him in the conduct of the expedition. The scientific observations of the Jeannette expedition must be of considerable value, involving as they do hydrographic, magnetic, and meteorological observations over an extended portion of the earth's surface previously unknown, and it appears surprising that after all these years they remain undiscussed. In addition may be noted the importance of De Long's hydrographic contributions, covering some 50,000 square miles of polar ocean, which indicate with equal clearness the character of 50,000 other square miles of area to the south, and thus prove the Siberian Arctic Ocean to be a shallow sea dotted with islands. The geographic results are represented in part by the attainment of the highest latitude ever reached in Asiatic seas, and in the discovery of Jeannette, Henrietta, and Bennett Islands. Discoveries, however, are both direct and indirect, and to positive results should be added successes of an inferential though negative character. Through De Long's northwest drift, the long sought for Wrangel Land shrank from its assumed dimensions as a continent, connecting under the Petermann hypothesis Asia with Greenland, to its reality, a small island. It is to be said that this reduction of Wrangel Land into a little island doomed De Long's expedition to certain failure, and closed Bering Strait as a promising route to high latitudes. For the Arctic canon of Perry yet obtains that without a sheltering coast no vessel can hope to navigate safely the polar ocean. With the march of time it is not to be expected that geographic problems connected with the vast ice-covered ocean to the north of Siberia will be left unsolved. These coming explorers may be more fortunate than was De Long, and while profiting by his experiences they will surpass his efforts, yet their successes cannot make greater demands on the courage and constancy of them and their subordinates than were shown by the gallant De Long and his associates in the fateful voyage of the Jeannette. End of Chapter 12. Recording by William Tomco.